The final PS4 update is here. We finally got a good look at the original PS5, and Sony just doesn't want to make bad games. Guys, real quick, by the time you're watching this video, the God of War DualSense is up for pre-order. You can pre-order it today and it'll come by the time the game launches, so you'll have a sick new controller to play God of War Ragnarok with. If you want to pick one up, use the link down in the description. The first thing we got to talk about today is The Last of Us TV show, because it's The Last of Us Day this Monday while I'm recording this video, and usually they have some game announcement, they have a print that goes on sale, some new merch, and I'm not gonna lie, this year it doesn't seem like they had a whole lot ready other than the amazing trailer for The Last of Us. They did add some merch over on the PlayStation Gear store, which is pretty cool, but honestly, looking at it, it looks like Abby merch that they were going to put out when the game originally launched, and then they saw the reaction to Abby as a character and the story and all that, and they may have hung on to this merchandise for a couple years to post on the store today while the reaction is not going to be so crazy. The one thing I almost bought that I really actually want is the Firefly stop sign. It's like a full-sized replica of it, but then I was like, man, it's got to be pretty easy to get my hands on just a regular old stop sign, and then I can make the stencil myself, and making my own sign honestly seems a little bit cooler than buying a replica from the game. We also, like I mentioned, got the trailer for The Last of Us on HBO, and it looks like The Last of Us. So I'm of like two minds on this show, right? Because, you know, it looks really good. Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey look great as Joel and Ellie. I have no problems there. It looks like they faithfully recreated the world from where the game starts to Boston, and also just like the clicker design looks exactly like it does in the game. But that's where I'm like of the other mind, where I'm just comparing this to the game, right? Like everything I'm praising is like, yes, this looks like the game, and it's bringing me back to my original criticism of the idea for this show, which is why not just make something set in the universe that expands on the game instead of making like a one-to-one rebuild of the game as a show. Because this show honestly could be the greatest TV show ever made. Like it could be flawless from top to bottom, and it won't be as good as the game, because the game is what made all of this popular, and the game is pretty much as close to perfect as it gets. So all the show is really gonna do at the best is make me want to play the game again, which I guess is good because the game is coming to PC, and I will definitely pick it up there again as well. I'll quadruple dip on The Last of Us because it's one of my favorite games of all time. I guess I just don't know who the audience is for this show, right? Like if it's for people who never played the game, they're missing out on one of the greatest games of all time. And if it's for people who played the game, I don't really know what they're gonna get out of it, because it's just the game's story one-to-one translated onto TV. But there were a few different scenes in the trailer that looked like they're not from the game. Nick Offerman as Bill also seems really cool. Either way, I'm gonna watch it just because it's a high quality looking HBO show. I hope though, after this season, we kind of get into what the Fireflies are doing in that 20-year gap that we have from the intro to the game and where Joel meets Ellie, because that seems like a great time period to explore. Also, this is just nitpicking because the song in the trailer definitely fits the tone and the style of the game, but why aren't they using the soundtrack from the game, which is also absolutely incredible, right? Like we have all of this stuff already made, and if they are making the show for new people who haven't played the game, it's all sitting right there. Like just use the original theme song from the game, because it's the theme song for The Last of Us. We don't need this like highly produced brand new song. I don't know. I feel like I'm being a hater. I'm sorry. I'm just like, I don't know. I love movies, I love TV shows, but the video game is what made this great. So I just hope that it gets people to play the video game at the end of the day, because it's going to be better than the TV show. So there's even more evidence for the upcoming showcase that may or may not be happening. The last time we talked about it, we were talking about how Final Fantasy 16 is expected to have some new reveal by the end of September or in early October. And now we have even more confirmation that another big game announcement is happening this same week. So this actual current week we're in. So basically you could text a number for the Callisto Protocol, and it started texting people back with the date of 29th of September, which is this week, as I just mentioned. So if you take this Callisto Protocol update and combine it with the update that we're supposedly getting for Final Fantasy 16, and then wrap it all up with the other update, which is that Silent Hill, a new game, which is leaked from the South Korean ratings board, and all of that basically comes together as like a big acknowledgement of the PlayStation showcase, right? Like Final Fantasy 16, the Callisto Protocol, a new Silent Hill, all of those games are connected to PlayStation in people's minds, and all of these updates happening around the same time basically is telling us, yes, there's going to be some big event where all of this is shown off. Now, we haven't heard anything from Insider Gaming, who's like the collective website of all the leakers you can actually trust, so I'm still taking this with a huge grain of salt, but all of these updates happening is like enough smoke for me to believe there's at least a little bit of a fire. And if we don't get a showcase, I think we're going to get updates individually on all these games, so that's awesome. I Either way, it seems like we can at least look forward to a new update on the Callisto Protocol, which is coming out on December 2nd, and I'm so excited for that because I don't think that game's going to miss that release date. And also we can expect a new update on the new Silent Hill, which I'm honestly really curious to see because everything we've heard says that Bloober Team is working on a remake of Silent Hill 2 and that another developer is working on a new game, and this new announcement we just heard about is the new game. All of that is to say subscribe to PSReady because you will hear every update here as soon as it happens. Another big piece of news that you probably saw over the weekend is that a YouTuber managed to get their hands on a full-on real PS5 dev kit, which I'm honestly shocked looks like it does, because if you guys remember, way back before the PS5 was even announced, this specific dev kit was leaked before. Like a picture of it came out on a game developer's Twitter and everyone was like, man, I hope that's not what the PS5 looks like because it's so futuristic looking. Like to me, it kind of reminds me of the ship that you see in the original Alien, like the big ring ship. And it also kind of looks like Savathun's ship in The Witch Queen. So if you know any of those ships, that's kind of what the PS5 dev kit looks like. And honestly, it's kind of crazy to see how huge this thing is. Like, you know how big the PS5 is right now, because you probably have one. It's hard to fit in a lot of TV centers and a lot of people are basically forced to use it horizontally. But when you see how much they've shrunk it down from the overall scale of this dev kit and they're still able to adequately cool it, that's pretty cool to see because it shows how big of a leap they made in the engineering from a dev kit all the way down to the retail model. Like they decreased the size of the heatsink internally last year once and they've already done it again. Like the new PS5 is about half the size internally as the one we got at launch. So when you take that new motherboard that I looked at with Austin Evans and compare it to what's probably inside this dev kit, it's kind of crazy to see how fast stuff advances. What I'm curious about is if there's going to be a new PlayStation 5 dev kit for the PS5 Slim or Pro, because as we've seen, the dev kits for PlayStation consoles love to leak early, so I'd assume if they are working on a Slim or a Pro, those dev kits are probably already out in the wild or will be getting out in the wild very soon, and that's when we'll start seeing real updates from Sony on the PS5 Slim and PS5 Pro. And I guess for those of you who still haven't been able to find a PS5 out in the wild, this is a good sign for you that none of this has leaked yet because it basically tells us that it's a little bit farther off than initially thought. I'm also super curious at what point they'd have to release a new dev kit, right? Like, is the PS5 Pro dev kit going to be just one dev kit that works for the Pro and the Slim and it's like allowing you to ship multiple SKUs out of one device? Or are they going to have to create a new dev kit for this new streamlined model where you're going to have a detachable disk drive? All of this stuff is super cool, and I wish that game developers weren't so cagey about it. Because one of the coolest things that came out of the whole GTA 6 leak was a bunch of developers on Twitter sharing unfinished looks at their games, which is something we've never really seen before. But the fact that one guy was sitting there on Twitter like, yeah, the graphics are the first thing finished in a game, and all these developers were like, that's actually like the last thing finished in a game, it got them to share all of these early looks. And I like that much better than waiting like 20 years to see all this stuff like we usually do with game dev consoles. The one piece of PlayStation history I'd love to get my hands on though is the Wave controller from the PS3 that was like silver and it was like a half circle. Now that is a controller that looked like Savathun's ship. You have to see this thing because when they announced the PS3, they actually had this controller sitting there right next to it, and then inexplicably they went back to the DualShock 3 design and never really talked about it, and then they had to switch to the 6-axis because they lost the rights to the name DualShock. It was like one of the craziest situations ever. So the first few years of the PS3, you had a controller that had no vibration. It was kind of weird. So with the PS Plus Essential, Extra, and Premium launch well behind Sony at this point, and the reception honestly being pretty good because of the games that are included in the library, people are wondering what's next for Sony, because Game Pass is always changing. It's always evolving. They're releasing like hardware now that's a little handheld that you can play Game Pass games on, and everyone's looking at Sony like, what are you gonna do? Thankfully, it seems like Sony is just content to keep doing what they're doing, and I'll tell you why I'm saying thankfully in a minute, but Shuhei Yoshida recently did an interview where he said, yeah, PlayStation Plus is basically made for older games that have basically sold through what they're going to sell through, and they can get a new life on PS Plus by getting people who haven't bought that game to subscribe to the service, which is basically like the perfect standpoint to have, in my opinion, right? Like if you're focusing on making a game that people are going to spend $70 on, you're going to put a lot more effort into that game and make sure that it's not buggy at launch, it doesn't have a ton of microtransactions on top of that $70 price, it's going to be long enough to feel like that price is justified, and it's going to really push the console forward. And I'm specifically talking about the perspective from Sony's angle. But if you're putting games on a subscription service day one, a lot of that quality control is less necessary because people aren't going to feel like they're spending $70 $70 on the game, they're gonna feel like they spent $15 on the game because that's what Game Pass costs every month. So just like we've already seen Microsoft do, Sony could kind of pull back a little bit on the quality of their games and say, hey, I mean, these games are gonna be patched over time. You know, some person might come in to the streaming service about 6 months after the game's launch, and the game could have been patched by then. So what if, you know, we maybe release the game at around 80 or 90% done? And you know, we spent over $100 million on this game, and it's going to take us X amount of time to recoup that from the subscription service cost adding up over time. So why don't we add in some microtransactions and maybe gate off some of the costumes or armor and make them additional purchases, right? Because, you know, you're only spending $15 a month on the subscription, so you could give us a little bit more, like maybe $5, $6, $7 for a pair of pants in a game. And that's great for us because that's just a flat out one-time purchase. It's not a physical good. It can't be returned. It can't be refunded. And if the game goes online, well, tough. Look, man, you paid the $7 to use that pair of pants in Call of Duty Warzone while it was available, but now we're on Warzone 2 and we made sure that none of the stuff that we had in Warzone 1 is going to transfer. So you won't see Ghostface, Billy, or Leatherface running around in Warzone 2, which, you know, is a big knock against it in my opinion. If you look at what Microsoft is doing with something like Forza Horizon, where they say, yeah, you're going to get Forza Horizon 5 day one on your Xbox Game Pass subscription, whether you're on PC or Xbox. But, you know, if you want to play the game a few days early and get all that extra DLC, you know, get those wheel spins where you can play a digital slot machine for cars in the game, you can pay an extra $40 and then you'll just unlock everything a few days early. So not only did you pay us the $15 a month that you're already paying to get access to Forza Horizon 5, but you paid us $40 more to get it a few days early, right? We saw it with Halo Infinite too. The campaign's good, it's completely free, which is great if you're playing on Game Pass, and the multiplayer is completely free whether or not you're on Game Pass or have Xbox Live. That's pretty cool until you realize that the campaign unlocks throughout the entire story are the worst cosmetic items in the entire game. You basically unlock no armor, no weapon skins, no armor paint. It's just stickers and chains for your gun. Like, I don't know. I don't think that's a fulfilling unlock, and they know it because when you unlock this stuff in the game, it doesn't even tell you what you're unlocking from the lockers you find them in. So yeah, that's why when Sony said stuff like, yeah, we're going to focus on making $70 games, and then when they've sold through what they're going to sell through, we'll move them over to PS Plus, that's exactly what I want to hear. Like, I don't have a problem paying full price for games because overall, I'll buy less games throughout the year and I'll probably end up paying less than I would for a year's worth of Game Pass, and I'll play better games. Like, I don't know, in my mind, I would gladly take 3 or 4 incredible games a year versus like 5 to 10 mediocre ones. I don't just need a game to play to keep me on the treadmill. I want to play great games. There's a lot of entertainment out there, you know what I'm saying? And guys, we got to talk about this final PS4 update because it really seems like we're hitting the point of final PS4 updates. If you look at the PSP, the PS Vita, the PS3, when these consoles start to hit their end of life scenario, the update text you get is this system software update improves system performance. They don't specify how, they don't say what it does. It's just basically a small little update that's probably patching a hack that someone figured out to pirate games on that console. And yeah, we've been getting updates like this for a little bit on the PS4, but they're usually in between feature updates. And now for the past few updates on the PS4, all we've been getting are this update improved system software and performance or whatever it says. And that basically spells out to me that finally, Sony is moving on from the PS4, even though Capcom isn't with Resident Evil 4 Remake for some reason. The annoying thing about these updates though is that they basically stop you from logging into the PlayStation Store or the PlayStation Network, which is annoying, especially with the PS4. If you have a bunch of digital games on your console, you have to connect to the internet every X number of days or all of those games become unplayable. So if you have an unlocked PS4 and you're playing these games that you might have ripped from a disc earlier or something like that, you're not going to be able to play a lot of the games you actually purchased. So you got to pick whether or not you want homebrew on your PS4 or you want to be able to play the games you already bought. Either way, I'm glad they're moving on from the PS4, but I think it's definitely taken too long. Like, seeing games like Gran Turismo 7 getting backported to the PlayStation 4 was really irritating. God of War, I'm not really too upset about because it looks like, just like with Horizon Forbidden West, this game was started development on the PlayStation 4 and then they looked at it and said, maybe we can beef it up a little bit and make it run and look better on the PlayStation 5, which is exactly what it seems like is happening. But when you're talking about stuff like The Last of Us Part 1, I'm glad that they're keeping net PS5 only, and I'm just kind of irritated that like we haven't seen anything about this Last of Us multiplayer game or a director's cut for The Last of Us Part 2. They wouldn't even have to do that much for The Last of Us Part 2's director's cut. Like, we don't even need DLC. All they really need to do is increase the textures to put them in line with what we're seeing in The Last of Us Part 1, but no, we're still stuck with that game on PlayStation 4. I don't know, either way, I really hope God of War Ragnarok really is the last PlayStation 4 game from Sony, because if that's the case and we get a few month gap between that and Resident Evil 4 Remake, and then after that, the developers see that we aren't getting any more official PS4 releases from Sony, that's going to be the sign from them that they can finally move on, because they don't want to release their games on a console that can be easily hacked, that's being paid less attention to either, and then they'll say, oh, enough people have PS5s at this point or are going to get them in the near future where it makes sense for us to fully support this machine, and that's when we'll start seeing games that actually push the console to its limit. Like, The Last of Us Part 1 looks really good, Returnal looks really good, Demon's Souls looks really good, but I'd say all of those games could be downgraded just a little bit to run on PS4, and while I'm glad that they aren't, I want to see games that I feel like can't be downgraded to run on PS4, and with this final update for the PlayStation 4, I feel like that's where we're getting. So yeah, this is the first gen where we're not getting a Super Slim, and it's kind of crazy.